Hi, I'm Danny with Tax 29 Tax Service.
And I'm Andy. You know, Danny, the prices of everything keeps going up and up.
Inflation.
Well, at Tax 29, we said enough. We're keeping our pricing structure the same this year as what we had last tax season.
So whether you file in one of our local offices or whether you file with us online at tax29.com, you'll get the same professional tax prep at affordable pricing along with year-round service.
For a list of our pricing or to find out more, stop by one of our local offices or visit us at tax29.com.
What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the Earth and our universe is really his story.
Welcome to Discovering His Story, a production of Youngstown Christian Television. In this program, we seek to integrate biblical history with secular history, see where they intertwine, and give us an idea of the reliability of God's story as He tells it in the Scriptures, and also give us some background to understanding some things we find in the Bible that we discover in history and in culture. We're looking now at the ancient period of history we're calling ancient times. And last time we started the ancient civilization of Greece. We hadn't gotten very far just looking at the civilizations as they began on the island of Crete, which of course is south of the mainland of Greece in what might be called the Aegean Sea, but primarily we would probably consider it as part of the Mediterranean. The Mycenaeans were the last group that we were looking at that were in control of Crete and their civilization, that civilization which fought against the city of Troy over in Asia Minor or in modern-day Turkey, an event we call the Trojan War. There's one more group that invades Crete, and that is the Dorians. The Dorians came into Crete and destroyed the Mycenaean fortresses and palaces by fire and war. This is called the Dorian invasion. At this point, writing disappeared, and we enter a period called the Greek Dark Ages. In the Greek Dark Ages, all written records stop because the Dorians had won. For the next 400 years, Greece was in a dark age, when very little known about that time, or about any time generally when there's no writing. But we do know something about what occurred because of the storytellers. So there was a lot of oral history that was taking place that later was written down. So not only is this considered the dark ages of Greece, but it's also the age of Homer. During this time, a simple, isolated lifestyle blended the distinctive elements of the Aegean world into a common Greek culture. Now, it was difficult for the Greeks to have one culture because they were so separated by the mountainous terrain. And yet, even though there was a time like this with no writing, culture began to be developed. And in part, I suppose we can look at Homer and his epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, as something which helped to bring that about. In addition, there were also buildings. We had mentioned earlier the building of the Parthenon. The Parthenon is that great structure built in Athens at this time. And at this time also, during this time period, we have inside the Parthenon something which is no longer there, the statue of the goddess Athena, because Athens is named after Athena, the goddess of war, and the Parthenon was dedicated to her. You can see, maybe not so clearly, in her right hand, as is the case in many of the statues of the gods, a small statue of Nike. Nike was not something invented by a shoe company. Nike was a goddess of victory. On her helmet is a sphinx, and on her breast an ivory Medusa. Remember, Medusa is that woman who had snakes coming out of her head. Also at this time we have the structure at Delphi constructed. This was a place where the Oracle of Delphi resided. This was the most important shrine in all Greece. And in theory, all Greeks respected its independence. So not one particular state of Greece had control over Delphi. Delphi was built around a sacred spring. Delphi was considered to be the omphalos, that is the center, or literally the navel of the world. So you might think of some places as being the armpit of the nation or the world. Well, Delphi was the navel. And I would say by looking at it, it was an Audi. I'm just saying. People came from all over Greece and beyond to have their questions about the future answered by the Pythia, the priestess of Apollo. Now this comes from the idea that Apollo, that god, Apollo, had control over the python. And python came to be used as the representation of the spirit, we might say the evil spirit, that was in control of the priestess of Apollo. In fact, later on, if you look in the book of Acts, when the Apostle Paul casts out a demon in the city of Philippi, if you look at the Greek text, you'll see that instead of the word demon, it says that he cast out, or says that she was possessed by a python. In the city of Philippi, there is a structure built there, a chapel, that has on the wall a mural of the Apostle Paul and the events that occurred there in Philippi. And interesting, on that mural, when he is casting out the demon of the girl, it has a picture of a python. So it goes all back to this the structure at Delphi, where people came to get answers to their questions. Their answers, as you might expect, were usually rather cryptic. And it could determine the course of everything from when a farmer planted his seedlings to when an empire declared war. But they were given in riddles, and so you had to kind of figure out the answer. It wasn't always so plain. So arguments over the correct interpretation of an oracle were common. But the oracle was always happy to give another prophecy, provided more gold was given. Some speculate that this priestess, or sometimes even priestesses, that were involved in giving these oracles, these prophecies at Delphi, were demon-possessed. That certainly is possible, especially with the relationship there was between that place and Python, which came to be used for spirits, evil spirits that inhabited people. There's also speculation that the spring that was there gave off some gases, or at least or underground there were gases that came up through holes or cracks in the ground, and that the priestess or priestesses, in breathing these gases, might have been thrown into some kind of hallucinogenic trance. And that may account for the fact that they were writhing on the ground and giving off these utterances. It may be 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It might be both and. I don't know. We have a picture here of a Greek priestess and a noble woman as they dressed at that time. And apparently there was even a Barbie in ancient Greece. A princess, nonetheless. All right, as we think about ancient Greece and Greek culture, I'm sure that our minds eventually come to the Greek mythology. This is a simple chart of the gods, the main gods of Greek mythology. Of course, it's polytheistic, which means they worshiped many gods. These were gods with anthropomorphic qualities. They seemed like people in many respects, but they had more power. And they contrasted, this mythology did, with other pagan systems in at least three ways. First of all, there was no powerful priesthood. The priests were simply public officials that were appointed to perform certain religious rites. Secondly, they lacked otherworldliness. The Greek religion was concerned with the present and emphasized earthly needs, not looking to beyond the grave very much. And they also lacked a system of ethics. There was no law from the gods. A person's belief was a private matter unless it upset the established rituals or denied the existence of the gods, as we find the apostles accused of in the book of Acts. Here is a chart that shows more of the gods, and you can see the relationship between the different gods. Pick out your favorite one and see to whom they were married and who were their children. So many gods that you had to placate in one way or another. We'll look at a few of them specifically. Here is the statue of Zeus. Notice that he also has a Nike there on his right, holding the scepter in his left hand. There he is on his throne. Here is another picture of that same statue of Zeus. You can see Nike a little bit better there. And Hera is his goddess wife. We also have Artemis, who is the hunter. And we have Hermes. The Roman representation of Hermes is Mercury, and Hermes, as you will remember, if you look at his hat, you'll see the wings on his hat, and also on his feet. He is the messenger of the gods, and so he became the symbol for FTD Floris, being the messenger. We have some more famous gods: Artemis and Apollo, Athena, and Dionysius. Dionysius is known as being the god of wine and partying. Now it's interesting that as you have all these gods, that eventually it was broken down into certain gods were viewed as productive in certain areas. And so you prayed to certain gods if you wanted certain things. So here's a chart that shows that. For example, to Apollo, you would pray for orderliness because he's the moderator of all things. If you wanted advice about the future, you would pray to Apollo, especially if you could get the Delphi. Ares, the onset of war, you'd go to him. And you'd want to find out what to do to win this war, get his help in the war. By the way, the names in parentheses are the Roman or Latin names, as the Romans adopted almost wholesale the entire mythology of the Greeks. So Dionysius, if you wanted freedom from social expectations, or if you wanted ecstatic union with the god, you would go to him and maybe drink a little wine in the process. Eros, that's a word that's familiar to us. If you're wanting to win the love of the person that is your beloved, you go to Eros. Hades, of course, is the god of the dead. Hades is the realm of the dead. And if you wanted to pronounce death to your enemies, you would pray to Hades. Hephaestus had skill at making machinery and working at the forge. And you can see our word Vulcan, vulcanize, comes from the Roman name of this god. Hermes was a trader or a merchant, a messenger, and so you would go to him if you wanted help in your trade. Pan was success for hunters, if you prayed to him in finding their quarry. Poseidon, of course, is the god of the sea. You would go to him for safe journey by sea. And Zeus, the head god, you would go to him for success in building an empire because he is in charge of his own empire. He has a firm rule and control. Aphrodite, if you wanted good looks, you would go to her. Artemis was the goddess that you would go to for easy childbirth or for success in running. Athena, clever strategies were her domain, domestic skills, and practical wisdom. She's the goddess of wisdom. Demeter was the god of fertility. Hecate, you'd go to Hecate for wealth or magical powers. You'd go to Hestia for protection of home and hearth. To Hera, asking for faithfulness in marriage. And to the Muses for inspiration in poetry and music. And in fact, that's where we get our word music, is from the Greek goddesses of poetry and music. Now it's interesting when you compare what Roman mythology said about the afterlife and then compare that to Roman Catholic doctrine as it developed out of Rome. When a person dies, for the Romans, they went to Charon. The Greeks would say Hades. The Roman Catholics would say the angel of death takes you. And that both of those Charon is one who takes the dead person under the Romans, takes their soul to either the Adamantine gate or the pearly gates, where the gatekeeper is Cerberus for the Romans, St. Peter for the Roman Catholics. The soul passes through Erebus for the Romans, purgatory for the Roman Catholics, where he is judged. If he is good, he goes on to the Elysian fields, or for the Roman Catholics, heaven, where he enjoys eternal bliss. If he is bad, he goes on to, the Romans said Tartarus, the Roman Catholics said hell, where for the Romans it was Pluto, for Roman Catholics it's Satan, tortures him forever. Now I bring this now in relation to the Romans because this all really comes from the Greek mythology. The mythology of the Greeks and then the Romans greatly influenced the development of Roman Catholicism. Now as we compare the gods of these many different civilizations, we can see that there is the Lord of Heaven, represented by these different names: Baal, El, Zeus in Greece, Ra in Egypt, and so on. We have Tammuz, who is the pagan Messiah, coming in Lebanon, in Babylon, also represented as Tammuz. In Greece, that's Dionysus. And then in Rome, he's Attis. In Egypt, Osiris. India has Krishna. These are all Messiah figures. And then Semiramis, the Queen of Heaven, and Ashtoreth, an area of Lebanon, and by that really it's the whole Levant area that we maybe call Palestine. The Phoenicians called her Astarte. The Greeks called her Aphrodite. And in Egypt, she was Isis or Hathor. So these are common themes throughout history of many of the same gods by different names in different places. Now, from the gods, let's go to something that we enjoy. And in this year of 2024, when I'm recording this, very soon will come upon us the Summer Olympics. So where do they come from? The ancient Greek Olympics. Well, the ancient Greek Olympics started in 776 BC. So you think about a point of reference. That was not too many years before the capturing of the northern kingdom of Israel by Assyria. So put it in that time frame. That's when the Olympics started, and it ran all the way through the 4th century AD. So for hundreds of years, they performed the Olympic Games in Greece. In the Olympic Games, they were in honor of Zeus, the king of the gods, Every 4 years, people came from all over the Greek world. If they're at war, they stopped the war, came together to watch and take part. There were a number of similarities and differences from the ancient Greek games to our modern games. Initially, those that wanted to start the Olympics up again in 1896 had nothing to go on except the records of the ancient Olympics and statues, and so they tried to emulate the events as they were in ancient Greece, but of course over time other events have been added. Well, let's begin with the opening ceremonies. In the opening ceremonies, a relay race in which a group of runners carrying lighted torches ran from the altar of one god to the altar of another. And we have something similar taking place today as a torch is lit and then different runners run in different parts of the world. In the case of these runners, the first one to reach the altar of Zeus, so it was a true race, and Zeus is the god to whom the games were dedicated, was given the privilege of lighting it. So whoever got there first got to light the altar. A number of events that are very similar to ours were used in the ancient games. Here is a picture that is on the side of a vase of a person throwing a discus. And on this one we have ancient boxing on the upper left. Ancient boxing had fewer rules than the modern sport. Boxers fought without rounds until one man was knocked out or admitted he had been beaten. Unlike the modern sport, there was no rule against hitting an opponent when he was down. There were no weight classes within the men's and boys' divisions, and opponents were chosen randomly. So you could have a little guy fighting a big guy. Instead of gloves, ancient boxers wrapped leather thongs called hemantes. Note the hemantes hanging above the boxer on the upper right. Those are leather thongs that they would wrap around their hands before fighting. And that left their fingers free. It was just around their hand and wrist. So their fingers were free to, use however they wished. Let's see. There was another event called the Pankration. And that event was a grueling combination of boxing and wrestling. We see that in the bottom right. Punches were allowed, although the fighters did not wrap their hands with the boxing hemantes. Rules outlawed only biting and gouging an opponent's eyes, nose, or mouth with fingernails. And genital holds were also illegal. Attacks such as kicking an opponent in the belly, which are against the rules in modern sports, were perfectly legal. Like the modern sport, an athlete needed to throw his opponent to the ground, landing on a hip, shoulder, or back for a fair fall. Free throws, were necessary to win a match. Attacks such as breaking your opponent's fingers were permitted. So here's another picture of the Pankration. You might notice that these guys aren't wearing any shorts. That's because not only this event, but all events were performed in the nude. So glad for that no grabbing the genitals rule. Some of the other events were, of course, things like the long jump, which we have today, sprint, we have the 100-yard dash, the javelin throw, and wrestling. By the way, in wrestling, it was similar to Pankration. You had to, Again, throw your opponent 3 times. Biting was not allowed. And again, no genital holds. But once again, also breaking the fingers was acceptable. Okay, there was also a pentathlon. That's where we got the idea. That's the 5-event combination of discus, javelin, jumping, running, and wrestling. Now, in our modern games, we don't include the wrestling. There are a couple different running events instead. But 5 events. And there's a picture of a pentathlon athlete throwing the discus and a javelin, jumping, and wrestling. By the way, when the modern Olympics started, there were some of these things that they didn't know how to do. How do you throw a discus? So the only way they had to gauge the method was to look at sculptures and say, well, it looks like he's holding the discus like this, and they copied off of that and eventually figured it out. There were also equestrian events, horse racing, as well as chariot races. In the chariot races, there were both 2-horse chariots and 4-horse chariot races, with separate races for chariots drawn by foals. Another race was between carts drawn by a team of 2 mules. The course was 12 laps around the stadium, which was 9 miles. Then there were running events. There were 4 types of races, running races. There was the stadion, which was the oldest event of the games. Runners sprinted for 1 stade, which was 192 meters, or the length of the stadium. The other races were the 2-stade race, which was 384 meters, and a long distance run, which ranged from anywhere from 7 to 24 stades. So that would be around 1,300 meters to over 4,600 meters. It could be anything in there. But all these, if these races weren't enough, the Greeks had one particularly grueling event, which we lack. That was also a 2 to 4 stade race. That's 384 meters to 768 by athletes in armor. This race was especially useful in building the speed and stamina that Greek men needed during their military service. If we remember that the standard hoplite armor, which was helmet, shield, and greaves, those items that were on the shins, like our shin guards, they weighed about 50 to 60 pounds. It's easy to imagine what such an event must have been like. Now let me go through quickly the requirements of being in the Olympics. First of all, you had to be a man, you had to go naked, and you had to have a trainer who acted as your doctor in case of injury. Once, when a boy was competing in a wrestling event, his mother disguised herself as his trainer so she could be with him. Now, the penalty for women watching the Olympics was death. Only men allowed. When the excitement that followed his victory, her identity was discovered. Though she was not punished from that time on, all trainers were also required to be naked. Winning was the primary objective. In chariot and horse races, the owners of the horse received the prize. And awards included not only a laurel wreath, but also a vase decorated with a picture of the particular event. Sometimes a champion was given slaves or a horse. In later years, boys' events were added, and still later, girls' events were also added, with the first modern Olympic Games being held in Athens in 1896. Well, I hope that gives you some interesting facts about the Olympics. Next time, we'll begin looking at the city-states that you know on Discovering His Story.
What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the Earth and our universe is really his story.